As time ticks on, the internet becomes an ever-growing graveyard. Death used to be synonymous with decay, not just for the people dying, but for the places they inhabit. If a town were to one day lose its population, the town itself would suddenly be left with an expiration date. Be it slow weathering from rain and wind or the sudden destruction of tornadoes and earthquakes, the life force of these places existed through the people willing to maintain them. The internet is in many ways a place just like the ones in our world, but one whose destination is both everywhere and nowhere. It has addresses and somewhat of a centralized network, protected by a small group of people, but the actual experience of the internet is in large part defined in connection and interaction. Since nobody lives in these places, they're designed to be inherently transient. Like an airport or a store, it exists for people to move through and be in temporarily. In this way, the internet is given life through interaction and attention itself. Unlike most places in real life, an internet location is nearly impossible to stumble upon. You at the minimum need to type in a random address, and most websites don't have the type of name that you can search expecting to find something there. Websites, as long as the servers exist, will exist themselves, but if abandoned by everyone, will almost always stay that way. They are defined by the life that finds it, invisible until observed and disappearing again afterwards, only existing in attention or in memory. If there were ever a place, a medium, an organ that represents the collective consciousness of humanity, it is the internet. It's a place that lives and dies by how many people pay attention to it, and the landscape of it is shaped by the wills of people. The only difference, of course, is that websites can continue to exist, well beyond when they've been all but abandoned. These places, these websites can become permanent ghost towns, unchanged and unweathered, never decaying and never disappearing. However, while most places online are interconnected, part of the World Wide Web, down this line of thought comes a realization. The World Wide Web isn't the only internet. There are smaller, isolated places, ones that capture smaller chunks of humanity and that deal with the constant threat of coming to a very sudden end. One of the most widespread and yet not strongly thought about examples of isolated collectives are video game consoles. It's easy to understate just how unique this is in the world. In a way, it's one of the only places that highly and almost exclusively concentrates children to young adults online together, barred by common interests and an often hefty price point for both games and the online service itself. In that sense, consoles themselves, but even further online console video games, are some of the most isolated pockets of the internet around. PC gaming and console gaming are different in many ways, but consoles isolation actually informs a lot about how a game is designed. Quite simply, for a game to exist on a console, everything relevant to a game must exist completely inside of it. Ever since the dawn of PC-centric game design, they've been given the ability to be designed openly. Games don't merely exist as a thing you can play. These worlds need guides, information, friend systems, matchmaking, lore guides, everything supplemental that orbits the things that exist beyond the world immediately around you. Even back in the 2000s, developers enjoyed the advantages that being connected to the World Wide Web granted them. Trackmania, a series launched in 2003, has from the start existed at the mercy of its fanbase. Trackmania is and always has been a racing series, but far more importantly, it's always been a track builder. Games with level creators have always been in an awkward position. In a way, it is quite literally an art form, a highly specific medium through which to express yourself, but that freedom is in direct contention with the highly simplified system it's forced to function within. This doesn't just go for the literal game mechanics, however. A game's aesthetics are incredibly important to not just how the game looks, but how it feels. For games centered around level creation, though, the more stylized the game is, the more layered within someone else's artistic vision the player is. Trackmania Nations Forever is a stylistically barren video game. While the rough textures of the time have become an aesthetic in the way that any era of technology does, the game design philosophy of Nadeo, the development studio, is to be as hands-off as possible. While much of the game, most especially the driving, exists entirely within the program of Trackmania Nations Forever, the creation is just as much outside of the game as in it. With each Trackmania game on PC is its own forum website, Trackmania Exchange. The game itself lacks any significant means of finding maps in its vanilla form. The lifeblood, the culture, the community experience of the game exists entirely through the exchange of art, the maps themselves. Through the website, you can see entire art movements and titling and technique, known creators, passion projects, the maps inscribed so strongly into the canon of this art form that they stand tall culturally next to the maps hard-coded into the game's campaign. This tradition is continued on to this day, with more games bringing more tools and spreading on to more websites, with places like Discord and Twitch being the cultural lifeblood of the entire Trackmania scene. So much of Trackmania is not in Trackmania, and that lack of barrier is the very thing that makes the game as we know it possible. Maps can be saved and transferred via GBX files stored on your computer, replays and ghosts can be analyzed in an editor, runs can be exported directly using a video encoder and uploaded to social media sites, plugins can be made and shared in order to patch up the mechanics the developers don't have the time or awareness to add to the game. The base is made by the developers, but the experience is shaped by us. This general effect is true for almost all games on PC. Even for games without level editors, community is now an experience that happens almost always outside of the video game itself. Despite there still being matchmaking and friend systems, social interactions within games are often only as long as the gameplay segments are. Communities in places like Discord instead exist almost as small towns, isolated from the rest of the internet via invite, but in such a way that still collects a large group of people. Even more importantly, these communities often come to enact their will on the games themselves. If not by directly contacting the developers, a game's modding scene can occasionally come to overshadow the primary intended experience as a whole. Even more importantly, modding provides a consistent flow of content to a game that may or may not otherwise die without it. The single best-selling video game to this day, and by far, Minecraft, is, quite frankly, hardly a video game in the most traditional design sense. Yes, there is a game progression, but its pure survival mode is not and almost never has been the thing the game is known for. The world of Minecraft is there far more these days as an excuse to hold many disparate elements and micro-mechanics, ones that interlock in a way that both lets them coexist and even further lets them exploit each other for any specific task the player wants them to. The base game is then even further combined with the two most important things to Minecraft's endless lifespan: plugins and mods. The elements of Minecraft are a potato, rich with enough conceptual nutrients so that the ingredients whatever modders want to put on top can be smoothly integrated. What happens is that every Minecraft server exists more or less in genres, ones that outright are not there in the base game itself and only are there due to the force of the Minecraft community's will. In this sense, rather than just building a track, the community's passion for Minecraft has literally reformed the landscape of the world itself. Be it Skyblock servers, minigame servers, drug running, PvP, Hunger Games, any game that wishes to be made, even within the simplified developmental box the game presents, is given access to tens of millions of players. Through its openness to the internet, Minecraft itself has turned from an individualized game into its own micro-internet, a digital world that, like Minecraft itself, represents the mass consciousness of the player base. While humans build towns, in this world, humans build universes, ones that shape the exact desires of both them and anyone else searching for that same interest. Even the art form of track building has evolved with time. Nowadays, players can directly import assets from Blender into the game. What started as a game with block sets stuck on a grid now has a website with tens of thousands of user-made blocks free to use by anyone, entire maps modeled from scratch for the purpose of being enjoyed by the most dedicated players. However, for those not skilled in 3D modeling, tracks in the newest edition of the series, Trackmania 2020, are just like the ones in the past. Clean, simple, and most importantly, kinda boring looking. In the course of the entire Trackmania series history, though, there was exactly one game that was not made for PCs. And, quite frankly, the difference is striking. Trackmania Turbo is a game like no other. Despite coming out in 2017, the game is cast in a blaring, unmistakable arcade aesthetic. From the announcer that chastises you constantly to the bright signs to the urgent UI to the breakneck speeds, Trackmania Turbo is a game that exists in a hyper-real smattering of a time long past. Unlike every other Trackmania game, it's known above all for its solo campaign. The campaign is a 200-track marathon spanning 4 different cars and biomes with entirely different controls and mechanics, with every single track having 4 medals: Bronze, Silver, Gold, and Trackmaster. Despite the game selling millions of copies, the estimates of people who have gotten every single Trackmaster medal, the highest on each track, is estimated to be around 1,000 people. Ever. Only after getting all 200 Trackmaster medals, a journey that takes most over 200 hours, do you unlock the Super Solo campaign. This campaign is the same 200 tracks with a new medal set, one set by actual professional Trackmania players: Super Bronze, Super Silver, Super Gold, and Super Trackmaster. Only 50 people in the 8 years since the game has released has managed to get all 200, 100 medals of which were outright cheated, 93 by one of the best players in the world playing in slow motion. Trackmania Turbo's legacy lies in a struggle unrelated to the other people you're competing against, but rather the wall of insanity standing in front of you. Even in the Trackmania games with iconic official campaigns, its legacy within them is not in the medals, but rather in the world record competition. Not only is it because author times themselves are ultimately not incredibly difficult most times, but also because all of the top players have had the ability to communicate easily, seeing as they all have the hardware able to both play the game and join online communities. They share replay files, export videos, record themselves using free software. Trackmania Turbo, while having global leaderboards, is locked to each individual platform it's on, and even further, the records above you are nameless and faceless unless you're already friends with them. Even with the power of plugins, it took until the writing of this script to finally crack and develop a website that's able to show who is on the leaderboard most of the time. This is a game that, despite its positives, was more or less destined to die. Without that outside contact, without knowing your rivals, without the hand of the community to optimize the game experience, it simply had no chance to stand next to the games before or after it. Trackmania Turbo is a multiplayer game that was designed as closed, and as such, its multiplayer was designed not to last. However, for the longest time in gaming, that was quite simply the expected outcome. Even for PC gaming nowadays, everyone understands that no game, even forever games, can last forever. Once the cost to maintain it outweighs the profits, once future updates are no longer projected to keep income flowing, that game's death is eventually ensured. And yet, importantly, the split between open and closed internets leads to two different kinds of deaths. While one is an apocalypse, the other is a slow, perpetual fade into nothingness. Single-player games, like multiplayer PC games, deal with the endless crawl of cultural abandonment, and this nature of our world has slowly become something of a fascination. Preservation has become not just more possible in the digital age, but easier to do by outright accident. Lost media is a topic more popular than ever, despite and due to our world preserving more information than ever. The internet is not just an organ of consciousness, but a reservation for any and all media that can possibly fit on it. While civilization in the physical world is an organ of life there, the structures and things we have, the systems that bear the weight of everything are not preserved so much as replaced. While every YouTuber likes to use the hypothetical of the ship of Theseus, it's not a hypothetical. Every part of a ship gets replaced with enough usage, from tiny canoes to quadrillion-dollar warships. Every building and object, be it disaster or the slow wearing of time, is subject to decay. The only thing that remains is the idea of what was there before, an object that looks similar or the same that we treat as the original. True preservation efforts in the physical world are relegated almost only to historical objects. They are decommissioned from their original purpose for the sole reason of existing, a physical object tied to a time or memory that has long passed. Even then, for many of the most prestigious historical objects, they get regular maintenance. Paint can detach from the canvas, get dirty, lose its luster, and people are paid handsomely to make sure it keeps the veneer of its original form, or at least refurbishing the parts that make it aesthetically unappealing. Lost media is a more modern form of history, people searching for evidence of a thing that certainly or likely was there, but often with no solid evidence for. However, the search for what was lost is almost always directed at something not made to be saved, something that in the past would never be preserved. Cultural trash. The term is not being used in a negative way here. People have always loved cultural trash, but in a different way from the things society has put on a pedestal. They are things that, quite simply, were not considered worth the effort of maintaining. Nowadays though, in a time where almost everything is saved somewhere forever, our natural curiosity eventually pulls towards what isn't saved, no matter its actual quality or, whether it's actually real. Most lost media exists right in the time of our slow transition into the modern internet age. The 80s to the aughts are a time where many people online grew up or saw media from, but also a time where the internet was at best relatively small and people saving large things was either impossible or something only a few people were actually trying to do. The fascination with these aesthetics is not just due to their usual interest in retro media and looks, but further because it's the closest time where we can't have everything we remember existing. Some 10-second snippet of an okay song can become the stuff of legends, a thing that people obsess over to the point that said obsession turns into something akin to love. And yet, most often, lost media is not found by some passionate person being connected, but rather through bulk searches, recordings of an entire day of television or radio that some random person in Omaha would do every single day. In the case of video games, though, there is something even more to it. Video files and their functionality has more or less remained the same for about as long as the internet, making some random file on some random hard drive the key to the entire preservation experience. Video games, in contrast, don't just have preservation of the general media, but also of our own personal experiences. If you've played Minecraft, you likely remember your first world, at least to some extent. Your first home, the first village you found, your first diamond, the first time you killed the Ender Dragon. Unlike the things we cherish from the past in real life, these places are only ever changed by us when we are present. They are memory palaces, locations that directly link to our past, something pure and untouched. It's a moving, living memory, something more tangible than a picture, despite it being a world that isn't ours. Unlike other media, you can own Minecraft, but that world, that digital physical place, might be gone forever. Either it was deleted, or the computer you played it on was thrown out, or it was corrupted in a way that couldn't be recovered. That world is almost only ever saved by you. Abandonware websites, while incredibly important, are also deeply impersonal. They are thousands-long lists of video games considered not worth keeping, even for the companies that made them. I hardly ever feel the urge to play some shitty Flash game I put on during computer class I found on Newgrounds before they figured out how to block websites. Almost all of those games exist in databases, always at your fingertips. It's only when you search for that game, or that save file, and it's not there, that remembrance turns into nostalgic obsession. In the act of preservation, however, there is something that, no matter how hard we try, can never be saved in its original state. Multiplayer games serve an even more special role on the internet, one that no other medium can. While websites live and die on their level of attention, in almost every case, the record of those places, and as such the experience of them, is able to be saved. The Internet Archive's Wayback Machine has, as of now, saved nearly 1 trillion web pages over the course of its history, the vast majority of them done by bots. In contrast, multiplayer games are, by their own existence, not just known about enough to be played simultaneously, but is the object of people's attention for long stretches of time. At the same time though, these places are inherently transient. People obviously cannot live inside of a game, and all it would take is one monstrous solar flare, a power outage, or a mom with a sledgehammer to cut our connection to these universes. Despite many multiplayer games containing homes, their nature makes every part of these worlds a temporary place. Abandoned multiplayer games have become more or less an obsession for the YouTube gaming community, with even me making a video about Tab Z, this abandoned April Fool's game that takes place in a zombie apocalypse. These videos, more than anything, focus on exploration, seeing the places and mechanics that used to be the core of these universes. The places that everyone went, the veins through which life sustained, now entirely empty. There is an inherent novelty to that. If you were to ever see part of your school with its lights turned out, an airport closed down, a subway system entirely barren, it would create a dissonance in your mind. Post-apocalypses are not defined by homes being empty. Homes are empty constantly. They can remain empty for decades and centuries, while life continues on without them. When a town is dead, when a city is dead, when a world is devoid of life, it's the streets that are empty. These games, more than just abandoned places, are the closest we will ever likely get to seeing a real post-apocalypse. A world that lived by attention and was forgotten, discarded from the social consciousness, yet never decaying. A sign of life for a game is not maintenance, but rather growth. Outside of games propped up by a modding and private server scene, updates are the only way to change these worlds, and a lack of updates normally signals the slow loss of attention on a game. Video games are not just artificial worlds, but worlds whose essence is formed entirely out of a specific time and place in culture, like any other art medium. For other works though, their existence as recordings or books maintains their whole existence within a bubble. Everything is contained within the bounds of these works, and so their life within culture is easily marked. They move behind us at the speed of time and exist as references to the past. These worlds, though, lack that grace. Their structure, their style, their every decision is trapped within a time, but the most fundamental part of the game, its player base, is forever trapped in the present. One of the most extreme examples of this is the website Worlds.com. Though the dedicated servers have finally, after 26 years, come to a close for some stupid, inane Web3 crypto thing, for the longest time you were able to play a multiplayer game from 1994 entirely unchanged at the drop of a hat. The game is surreal nowadays. Thousands of videos exist of simply walking through dead lobbies, through empty dance halls, mazes, long stretching hallways, entirely unspeaking. Despite the lack of commentary, or perhaps due to it, some of these videos end up with tens to hundreds of thousands of views. There is a pure fascination in this drearily empty space, places created by people at some point, but divorced entirely from the existence of the artist. The game, with the passage of time, is consumed entirely by a new, alienating feeling of isolation. Seeing the game as it is in these videos can almost give you the feeling that this game was basically always abandoned, its aesthetics being unfathomable to the idea of popular gaming, but it was quite literally a cutting-edge innovation in its time. Worlds.com was, in no uncertain terms, a phenomenon, a social meeting place in real time across the entire planet, talking to people you've never met and would never have been able to. Bowie World was a promotion in the 90s where, supposedly, David Bowie sat in his world and hosted a live Q&A. It was built entirely for the promotion's timeframe of only a few hours, and the rest of its existence has been sitting there, empty, devoid of purpose. The game looks and sounds as it does not due to hardware limitations so much as internet connection. At the time, dial-up internet was the best the average consumer had, and as such, the game had to be made of highly simplistic textures placed in a small world constructed entirely of cubes. The game feels creepy to us now not only because of its emptiness, but even more so due to the progression of technology. Our games now are whole worlds projected into our minds. Both culturally and functionally, we are able to be sucked into these places, to be filled by music and bright colors and seemingly living creatures. The gap in expectations for what a video game world is, that emptiness between the songs, the relative lack of sound effects, the textures that barely hold these walls together into some sort of cohesion. It's made uncanny not automatically, but by how our expectations of the medium have changed. The barrier between our world and the digital, to our perceptions, is no longer a clear barrier. So, once we step into a place like this, we are engulfed into its every unintended consequence. Worlds.com has not only taken the role of digital ruins, but also of a retroactive horror experience. Retro horror as a genre exists for many of the reasons that Worlds.com is now creepy, but the intentional exploitation just makes logical and logistical sense. Out of any indie game genre, outside of the now lucrative mascot horror with franchising opportunities, indie horror is a very poor genre. That's to say, games are almost always completely free or dirt cheap, short experiences that people aren't willing to put money into, and made most often by either a small team of people or just one person. Retro aesthetics are popular in indie games in general for the simple reason that they're not just less intensive, the thing that informed how they looked, but also far, far easier to do. Retro horror was inevitable, in so much as horror games would always have been made with retro aesthetics, even if the combination didn't actively complement each other. However, luckily for us, they do. There is truly a feeling of cultural isolation you experience when delving back into a retro game. Even in a fully flourished experience, a game that still holds up today, there is that feeling hovering over your head that this is a world that has been cut off from active social consciousness. You are alone in your experience of this place. As stated earlier as well, there's a certain way that aesthetics of the past consume their nuances. It becomes harder and harder with time to see the details cased within and beside the sharp polygons, the bright colors, the compressed sound fonts. All games get blanketed by the era they existed within, the technology that formed their overall look, and in the process, the specific humanity and individuality of these games can slowly drain away. While it's not the case for all games, it can make some take on this ethereal feeling. It's like this world has always existed, even if you know it hasn't. For retro horror made in the modern era though, ones that mimic the past instead of actually being there is an inherent tension that adds even further to the dread playing them. Our minds cannot fully stop themselves from treating an authentically designed game as somewhat of the same as the ones in the era they're mimicking. But above all, there is an implicit understanding. These games don't need to stay that way. Shipwrecked 64, in my opinion, is one of the shining examples of the retro horror genre. It is, by technicality, an ARG. Elements exist outside of the game itself that help you solve it, but it is primarily a video game. The story is of a game that, rather than being unreleased, was out for 3 days before being pulled off of shelves. The game we're playing is not haunted, is not secretly corrupted, but is rather presented by an archival team. One that, in its most interesting decision the game makes, created a safe version of the game alongside it. Labeled the 2023 version, the more you play it, the more of a special quality it takes on. You are required to play the safe version before you ever touch the original. In the fiction of retro horror, creepypastas, urban legends, we have access to one side of the puzzle, the original, the safe version. These stories are corrupted reflections of our memories. Their impact depends entirely on the context of the original to make it unnerving. Some recreations are made, something that is meant to capture the essence of these stories, but the original works are almost always inherently beyond reality. They can be shown visually, but the experience of them, be it due to supernatural factors or just the circumstance of the original really being corrupted, cannot be recreated. In modern retro horror, we're given the exact opposite. We're told that, supposedly, this game, or at least the vision of this game, came from a normal part of a normal world, then corrupted either by a ghost or a rogue developer or some other force. Each side, while effective in its own right, is an incomplete piece of the total puzzle, some uncrossable barrier between what is physical and what is told. Both require the other to exist, but by their nature, they almost never can at the same time. Shipwrecked 64 is one of the only games I've ever seen to do both. The game is much shorter than a real retro game would be, but we find out as we uncover the mystery that it was very intentional, the top layer existing only to drag you deeper below. Even with that revelation, so much care was put into every detail, every sound effect, every asset, with the excuse of the archival team properly filling in the minor gaps in logic. You become used to, and in some way, endeared to the world of Shipwrecked. It is properly relaxing and fun. Even the eerie areas are eerie in the old video game sense. You become used to it, to the dialogue, the music, the skybox, the aspect ratio. When you're given that base of expectations, it does things to you. It adds a context that didn't exist before, that this isn't just a place that was made to be dead. It was, at one point, a game with a target audience and an attempt at broad appeal. So then, with every detail changed, every song note out of tune, you know in the back of your mind that something is very, very wrong. A game not corrupted, but intentionally warped. A game that, before it ever hit shelves, was waiting for the moment to wreck itself and drag you down into its depths. Only through our memory and the placement of retro games is this even possible to make as it was, borrowing from the expectations of not just the originals, but our corruptions of them. Because, sometimes, an intentional destruction can be much, much more painful than a simple, empty world. On May 31st, 2013, an entire community vanished off the face of the planet. Flipnote Studio was a fairly simple 2D animation program available for free on the Nintendo DSi, releasing in the very final days of 2008 to Japan and soon after to the rest of the world, giving any young soul with a Christmas gift and an active imagination the ability to animate and share their creations with kids all across the planet. Unlike most social media, being freely available to the open internet, both Flipnote Studio and Flipnote Hatana, the name of the social function in the app, existed in a place isolated from the rest of the world. Stored away on this toy parents gave to their kids to idly entertain them was an entire world of creativity. With nothing but a stylus and a dream, millions of animations, splashes of creativity traded along this special place, even being able to be exported as videos and posted to places like YouTube, some animations of which have tens of millions of views today. It has remained as a niche style of animation, being the start for so many talented artists that its DNA continues on in small ways in the very fabric of not just animation, but online art as a whole. However, that influence now only exists in echoes. On May 31st, 2013, this world came to a sudden and inescapable end. There were many vocal protests once the closure was announced. Fans contacted Hatana and Nintendo in droves, offshoot websites were attempted to be made to preserve the fan base, everyone collectively screamed and shouted to stop the closure. This entire appendage of online consciousness and creativity begging to live, but there was nobody on the other side that was truly listening. Time kept ticking forward, pushing endlessly towards a world where the haven of Flipnote Hatana was nothing but a distant memory. In my last video, I spoke on the arbitrary nature of death in video games. In Journey, your character is entirely unable to die. Death is the most common risk and punishment in video games, but it doesn't, matter most of the time. Some games have things like hardcore modes, with genres like roguelites functioning on a similar principle, but death most times just resets you back to a checkpoint, a minor repeat in your inevitable path to the end of your predestined journey, wink wink. Other games have the same effect, ones like Manifold Garden also making death impossible, and in the case of both games, a death of some sort is the thing you're ultimately seeking. Both games serve as commentaries on video games as a genre, not through dialogue but through a threadbare stripping down of everything that games wear to feel real. When every arbitrary aspect of what a game is taken away, all you're left with is a journey on a quest to the end of the world. Single-player games are designed, eventually, to end. Games don't just live by attention, but can only be created and perpetuated by it. Every game takes anywhere from thousands to potentially millions of man-hours to make, from solo developers to hundreds-wide teams working for years to make a universe even worth our time and attention. Luckily for us, single-player games are given, at least, the benefit of some type of closure before our window into it disappears forever. Multiplayer games are not given that same grace. These are worlds that are designed not to live forever necessarily, but to live indefinitely. It exists more or less in the same way it always has, and even when updated, it's updated to another unchanging, endlessly existing world. Most multiplayer games are structured closer to sports than anything else, so these worlds, regardless of their theme, decoration, story, and detail, are arenas and not much else. And yet, despite their indefinite nature, among almost everything in the social organ of the internet, it is the least preservable. In the case specifically of consoles, however, of closed internets, it's much, much worse. While a multiplayer experience on PC dies a more or less natural death, being starved of attention until it's no longer supportable or simply becomes a ghost town, one of the single things that attention cannot stop is the decommissioning of a closed internet. Due to the manner of its existence, consoles more or less cannot be easily cracked and modded, cannot be widely preserved, and cannot be supported by custom servers. There are methods to do so, but they are often near impossible or near impossible to adopt on a mass scale, being technologically difficult for the average user. This makes for a grim reality for all console-exclusive games. They are a bomb with a ticking clock, the time unknown, whittling down day after day to an unstoppable apocalypse. If you've seen my most viewed video essay, you've heard of one of these cases. The Noble 14 was the final 14 players to exist on the original Xbox Live, persisting through the Halo 2 matchmaking system for nearly a month after what was supposed to be the final match. What I didn't mention in that video was the intention. Clearly, there was no real possible way to keep playing the game at this point. The function of multiplayer, the game of Halo 2, was no longer possible to sincerely engage in. What this was a protest against the gods that decided these worlds, the entire multi-universe of Xbox Live, was no longer worth maintaining. This protest did not work. In fact, it's not even particularly unique. Every time, for every dedicated community, there is a desperate push from everyone still left behind, a cry across thousands of worlds or even just one to keep it going, promises of support, willingness to even pay a regular fee, and almost every time, those cries are ignored, and, unceremoniously, the world comes to an end. like it never existed. There is an effect this has. These games, these nodes within the net of consciousness, were killed before they were allowed to die naturally. The uniqueness of this situation, this interaction of want being ignored in a place controlled entirely by it, leaves a permanent, irremovable scar where it used to be. Despite it being gone, its outline remains, and nothing is properly able to take its place. As time goes on, this location of memories becomes nothing more than a container of them, and with no real place to experience it all again, our collective memory begins to shift. The game is slowly mythologized. People can't move on from it. Some permanent part of themselves, in the back of their mind, is stuck in that world, in the moments just before it all came to an uncaring end. The June Archive and Restoration Project is a channel about nostalgia. Such channels have existed for a long time now, re-uploads of old Flipnote animations or vines or just playing through an old beloved video game. However, this channel promises something truly special. It began on April 12, 2022, approaching the 10-year mark since the death of Flipnote Hatana. Supposedly, in the brief time after the closure of the service, in that last celebration of life, a few hundred animations were submitted, only to be trapped in the limbo of the server's shutdown. These entries, through some means, were saved but in a corrupted state. Incomplete, malformed, but a real look at the final moment of a cultural touchstone. However, as you peruse the entries, you see that these corrupted files are corrupted in a very specific way. Each video starts as an iconic animation shared and edited all across the service's history, until... Corruption in this case is not in data, but in content. A window previously closed off to us, a connection to the inner world of Flipnote Hatana, breaks away in the missing pieces, allowing us to look into a city dealing with a doomsday clock. This world is one dependent on servers, but more so dependent on attention that can only be expressed via creation. And so, with the shutoff of the servers, the life pouring into this world of characters, mimetic entities formed and perpetuated by stars, the Hatana form of awards on a post, are cut off from their supply of life. What's shown is not only a ticking clock, but a bloodbath. All of the long-loved, long-known entities are either trying to stop the end of everything, or are hunting each other down just to live a little while longer. All of this, though, while each animation is charming, impressive, and unnerving in its own right, is secondary to what's actually going on here. Flipnote Hatana was a relative artistic phenomenon. This series was made for anyone to watch, but specifically for those who lived on the app, who actually participated, and it weaponizes that quite cleverly. In my opinion, whether or not the fiction of this story is actually true, that there is in story a real world coming to an end, the truth is immaterial. The videos, even in their horror, are inseparable from the silly, lighthearted community this was all born from. The simple art style and compressed audio never leaves, no 3D hyper-realistic creature jumps out at the screen, and in this horror screams a larger feeling, one of nostalgia. These videos are made in a very manipulative manner. Many possible routes can be taken in the course of a retro horror web series, but one where everyone's beloved characters get systematically murdered is a very specific choice. We come to learn that there is a context to the YouTube channel, not just some mysterious vessel through which these videos start releasing. The being that runs the June Archive and Restoration Project is, literally just a little guy. Fuzz, like the characters in this apocalypse scenario, is a mimetic entity, but unlike them, it exists on a higher layer, in our time, in the social organ of the open internet, speaking directly to us. Fuzz is, seemingly, the formation of our collective nostalgia, existing in the shape most appropriate to evoke that nostalgia, that deep desire to go back to a time of visible pixels, of touchscreens and styluses and blissful isolation. Fuzz, like the other characters, live on attention, but in their case, they have a direct access to our attention, not isolated via the DSI, but through YouTube views, comments, and likes. Their goal, like the thing that formed them, is simple. Go back into the past and recover what was lost. A literal time machine. The overarching story of the June Archive is precisely this. Between the windows into a dying world, we're tempted by Fuzz's offer, to go back to where everything was simple. The series comes to a head when we're finally met with the ability to make a deal with Fuzz. We're put into the position of what seems to be a staff member for the June Archive that is within the world of it, attempting to break a code and restore this world back to where it was. Seeing as it's been dead since 2013, the only way to do so, to fulfill the preservation goal of this channel, a thing done for everything the internet has been able to, the only way to do it is to turn back time. After some work and making a deal with the devil, we as a community were presented with a choice. Escaping the room, we're met with a child, still playing on their DSi, preserved just like everyone else. We could either leave them to dream or wake them up. In the ARG, we as a community chose to wake them up, to reject nostalgia. Our character, presented with the chance to rekindle the flame of Flipnote to turn back time, kills the child inside them, and with it, Flipnote entirely. A good theme, the right choice, an understandable, impactful ending. The funny thing is, though we understood the themes as a community, in real life, nobody has seemed to move on. There were official efforts to revive and continue Flipnote Hatana. Nintendo created Flipnote Studio 3D for the 3DS, but Nintendo and Hatana had a falling out, unceremoniously killing the service before it even began. By 2018, any official service regarding Flipnote Hatana was dead. Fan-made services would pop up, allowing archival browsing and sharing, but what was lost was lost. Sudomemo is a service that was made to be a revival of Hatana, hosted not on a console but on the true blue open internet. This is the closest we've ever gotten to getting the actual thing back, Flipnote Studio and Hatana as a service, adapted to the modern internet, but looking at it, it is now a relative ghost town. The hottest notes are hardly getting any stars, its Patreon has gone from an initial push to slowly coasting lower and lower, and seeing this, you might think that it's being given the death by abandonment that it deserved, but there is simply something off about all of it. Sudomemo simply could never become what Flipnote was, even if it took off in popularity and came to surpass the original entirely. Looking at the notes, you see a culture in stagnation. People not creating things their free spirit tells them, things that are actively changing and shifting, its own mini-internet with its own isolated culture, but rather an imitation of the culture remembered from over a decade ago. Some original notes are made, but almost everyone is still trapped in 2013, still trying to live in that moment where everything was innocent, where you had nothing but a stylus and your own mind to share with all of the other kids across the world. This is a community bared open to the wide-scale sharing of the internet, filled with adults pretending they're returning to a sacred place. Even the June Archive and Restoration Project can't seem to die. Every few months to a year, despite a conclusion being reached, despite nostalgia being rejected, there are still more videos, still showing this endless apocalypse in action, a state of constant dying, being refreshed and put into new animation after new animation. In seeing both Sudomemo and the June Archive, I feel the same dissonance as any other retro horror. These limitations being adopted out of emotion instead of it being the tools available at the time, stagnating ourselves to pretend to be somewhere and someone we aren't, the ghost of some vulnerability long shifted by the changing tides of life. However, in the place of abject horror, knowing that the modern can jump out at me at any moment, in Sudomemo I just feel this dread. Not that something might jump out at me, but that nothing is going to. These few things we can't save, can't preserve, can't let die naturally in our social consciousness become immortal. Persons might reject nostalgia, might reject memory, but people don't. So long as this endless hole exists, there will be people trying to fill it, unable to emotionally accept this simple reality. Flipnote Hatana is dead. It could be relaunched today, kept exactly the same as it was or even adapted to the times. A good faith recreation either on the DSi or the Switch 2, it simply wouldn't matter. It would be something else. All of these worlds taken from us too soon can never be the way they were, existing in a time with a different social organ, different in shape and culture and feel and technology, and all of them affecting each other and affecting how we remember them. Each and every abandoned game is a temple. One honoring the long-lived memories of a time now past, the world left behind in the wake of the newer and the flashier. Their rust is made evident by the march of time, its unchanging turning visible polygons to visible wrinkles, a portal to a time long past. We're tempted to treat these places as undying, but despite their untouched state, they died a long time ago. Faced with these memory palaces, we can choose to play them as someone trapped in the past, or to play them as someone reflecting in the present. I choose to reflect. What's your choice? Good news, my Patreon actually has benefits now. Do you want to be part of a video essay club? Like a book club but for video essays? In my new Discord open to anyone, link in description, me and my patrons once a week select a video essay and discuss it at 12 PM CST every Sunday, a club I call Lakeside Chats. We also plan to be hosting game nights every Saturday and at other random times, open to anyone sometimes and open only to patrons if there's too many people looking to play. My patrons also get a channel to themselves where I offer video updates and details and can just generally chat, as well as a Q&A channel where I provide detailed answers on anything you might want to ask. I'll also be featuring any fan art here. This video is One Piece by Tim.mp3 on Discord, with me as Hornet from Silksong. I'm quite active on the server in general, so anyone looking to meet me and talk will be able to do so. The other benefit of patrons is getting their names in the end credits, and for the higher tiers, getting their names read aloud, which I'll do now. Patreon shoutouts to Girl Dog Blunt, Edmund Dong, MF Bitchboy, Owen McGee, Dankly Voidly, Wayne Wheeler, Cat Called Blep, Lucky on Fleek, Beanie Guitar Guy, Damage 43, Artelis, there's a lot of new ones now, Artelis, Supanato, John M, Oreo, Bestest Patron, Jacob Falk, Robin Michael Becker, Maiden Batter, Ted H, A Simple Lamp, Ro Ramden, Jocelyn, Owen Gerberly, Fake Milk, Rudy Schubring, Peter Healy, Purple Hazelnut, Christian Cook, Celestial Tangle, Kevin Paulson, Poetry Stud, Necra, MC Logic Master 69, a fucking amazing name. War Sometimes Changes, R2, JP Benini, Tricky Goose, Nicotina, Danny Miller, Crimson Aurora, Sistine Capella, really good name, Orange Dude 107, Luna, Umbrella, Truman Tietmeyer, and Lucy G. Thank you again to all of my patrons. You make it possible to not take sponsors while still paying rent. As one little note, I'm not going to make it like a pity party, but sorry for only making like 2 videos in the past year. I've been dealing, ever since my YouTube channel blew up with some stress-related health issues, and though I've finally gotten a handle on them as of recently due to looking into like OCD health anxiety cycles. I don't know if I have OCD, but it helped anyways. And also, sorry if my pronunciation is off. One of the things that has affected my body due to stress is I have some potential minor nerve damage all across my entire body due to nerve compression, due to the amount of inflammation I have. So if I sound weird for a while, that's why. The tip of my tongue is a little messed up at the moment. It always feels like it's burnt in some weird way. And it makes stuff like S sounds, TH sounds, and T sounds very difficult to do precisely. Anyways, I don't know if anyone else notices that, but with all that said, thank you for watching and have a nice day.